Today we'll be talking about the Greek Underworld, the 5 rivers that surround and or traverse it, and about the interesting characters one would encounter if planning to travel to Hades for a vacation, and much more. So, if you're looking for some inspiration for your homebrewed world, or you're simply here to learn something new, I promise you will find out things you were never taught in school, so stick around and enjoy. Hello all you funky people, Funky Monkey here, welcome to today's episode. Before we jump in our story, let's talk about the miniature I will be painting today. Today I will continue painting the demon Lord Balazar, Lord of Access, an amazing miniature. I divided the painting process of this miniature in two. Last video I painted the palanquin, and now it is time for Balazar himself, his minions and his victims. In my naivete, I thought that I can easily finish the second part of the painting process quite fast. Little did I know this would turn into the longest I spent on a miniature in a very long time, but it was worth it. The first step is to finish painting the palanquin, the last elements of it. Then to move to Balazar himself and then take care of his victims, leaving his minions for last. I took this route because I'm having a hard time handling the miniature without putting my grubby little hands all over it. And second, because I want to make sure I spend more time on the areas that will catch the eye most. Now that the base color of the curtains is applied, it is time to add some shadows using Crimson Shade. I'm trying to make sure that I only apply the red paint where it needs to go, otherwise it is quite hard to cover. Otherwise it is quite hard to repair any missteps. A lot of paints and shades have gone into this miniature, and I will show all of them at the end of this video so you have enough time to look them over. Okay, now let's get our cats in a row and go through the pre-story checklist. I have some awesome in my large mug. I chose something with notes of caramel and milk, something I desperately need in my life. And I have some awesome, oh, there it is. I have some awesome fruit juice in my mousse cup. I also have something for the soul, and I have my lovely assistants around me somewhere. Well, I see one and the other one is desperately trying to get through the door, so I'm sure they will make an appearance later on. How about you? Are you all comfy, cozy and ready for an awesome tale? Perfect, then I think it's time for a story. From ancient times, people have been equally fascinated and terrified by the afterlife, the underworld and everything they both entail. The belief in the underworld usually goes hand in hand with the belief in a paradise, but that's not always the case. If you think about it, it makes sense. People want to believe that those who are wicked in life suffer eternally, or if not eternally, at least for a very long time, while those who led a good and peaceful and kind life are rewarded eternally. Depending on the age and area we are talking about, there are significant differences in how people view the afterlife, but for the most part, the views are pretty similar and follow the same, let's call them guidelines. As time passed, the notion of the afterlife changed and evolved. The Greek underworld was no different in that respect, and over time it evolved, it transformed, although its essence remained intact, for the most part. The underworld was divided in several layers, each being the final destination for a different category of souls. There was one where wicked souls would suffer eternally, one where souls had a bleak and boring afterlife, one where they would continue their existence in sorrow and lament, and one where they would enjoy the best of things. Once an individual died, there was no turning back. The fates would stop spinning the thread of life, Hermes, the messenger god, would take the soul to the nearest entrance to the underworld and the soul would begin its journey. If the soul refused to enter the underworld or abandoned the journey at any point, the demons of death, the Erinyes, would be set loose to bring the soul to the underworld, and that was that. Simple and straightforward, right? Well, people are never content with the inevitable. This is true now as it was in ancient times. People throughout the ages have tried to find solutions to cheat death. When they failed, they tried to find workarounds, and when their solutions finally failed, they came up with explanations as to why they failed. At least that's my personal opinion. As a result of this repeated failure, legends were born. In ancient times, they spoke of extraordinary individuals that performed the incredible. Individuals that marched in the underworld, performed some incredible task and marched right out. Of course, this was not something possible for the average individual, for the commoner, or even a great and renowned leader. This wasn't possible for someone you knew if you were an ancient Greek, lest the underworld lost its fear factor. But of course, you knew someone who had a friend who heard what the Therme about someone who had a cousin who came back from the underworld. But why was this unachievable for the average individual? What would somebody encounter in the underworld that made it nearly impossible to march in, do something there, and then march back out? Or what made it impossible for the souls of the deceased to simply walk out of the underworld and roam the world? Well, let's take a look at the defensive system of the Greek underworld, or the way it was laid out. Help you get a better picture. By the way, just as a short disclaimer, the Romans borrowed much of their mythology from the Greeks, and as such, most of the things are identical with minor tweaks. For example, the roles of some of the rivers found in the underworld were switched. But I will go with the older versions of the myths, because otherwise things will get a little confusing and I want to try to avoid that if possible. And one more thing, not all aspects of the Greek underworld have survived in written sources, so some information might be patchy. Now, there were 5 rivers to cross before reaching the final destination, each serving a different purpose in the underworld. Once a soul would be brought to one of the entrances to the underworld, either the one close to the Greek settlement Tenarus, or the one in the bottomless Alcyonian lake at Lerna, or the volcanic lake Avernus. Souls would begin descending through a vast network of caverns that got darker and darker. After several days of this, they would encounter the first river, the Acheron. The only way to cross the Acheron was with the help of Charon, the ferryman. He was an infernal boatman who ferried the shades or the souls of the deceased from one bank of the river to the other in exchange for payment. This is why Greeks and later Romans would bury their dead with gold coins called obols on their eyes or in their mouths. By the way, this is something that still happens even to this day, at least here in Romania. Coins are placed somewhere on the deceased person's body as payment in the afterlife. Although most people are Christian here, they are still holding on to this pagan belief. If a shade failed to pay the ferryman, they would be stuck on the wrong bank of the Acheron and be cursed to aimlessly wander the in-between worlds for eternity. The Greeks don't describe the river too much, but there are instances after they founded several colonies in the Italian peninsula where they described the river as flowing in Lake Avernus, which was found in the Italian peninsula, feeding it. Acheron is called a river of pain and sorrow and is described as being very deep and its waters pitch black. Once the souls are ferried over the Acheron, there is a desolate stretch of land that they have to traverse before they reach the banks of the Styx, perhaps one of the most famous of the infernal rivers. The Styx was believed to encircle the underworld 7 times and prevented anyone from crossing it without Charon. As you can see, Charon, the boatman, appears once more as the individual who helps Shades move even deeper in Hades. The Shades could not cross the river on their own as the waters of the river were deadly cold. I don't know how much of an impact that has on souls and Shades, but apparently the water was deathly cold. The river originated in the Oceanus, the great ocean made up of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea in ancient Greek perception. The river bore the name of the Oceanid Styx, daughter of Oceanus or Oceanus, and Thetis, the mother of Zeus, Nike, Kratos, and Deea. Styx sided with her son Zeus in the war between the Titans and the Olympian gods, and for this, her son honored her with an important task, that of witnessing and enforcing the oaths that gods would take. All oaths sworn by gods had to be made on the banks of the river Styx, and so the Styx became known as the river of unbreakable oaths. For the average mortal, the Styx was also the river of hatred. The Oceanid Styx was said to live in a cave close to the entrance to the Underworld, with her cave being built on silver pillars that brought it closer to Olympus. Moreover, Iris, the messenger goddess of Olympus and goddess of rainbows, was the one sent to fetch water from the Styx to be used in oaths the god would take. As you can see, Zeus eventually stopped visiting his mother and had the water of the Styx brought up to Olympus so that the gods would swear by it. Don't be like Zeus, visit your mother. The other bank of the Styx was guarded by Kerberus or Cerberus, the famous guardian of Hades. He was represented as having multiple heads, a snake's tail, and snake heads jutting out from different parts of his body. But eventually people settled on only 3 heads, and eventually he lost the snakes and the snake tail. He is said to have been the second offspring of Typhon and Echidna, with his older sibling being Orthrus, the giant 2-headed dog of a giant whose name I cannot remember at this point. Anyway, and his younger siblings were the Hydra and the Chimera. Quite a litter, if you ask me. As guardian of Hades, he would allow any shade in, like a good boy, but would not allow any shade to get out of Hades, again, like a good boy. Only 3 times in the whole Greek mythology was Kerberus tricked. Once by Heracles or Heracles, but he didn't really trick Kerberus but overpowered the dog. Once by Orpheus, who used music to lull Kerberus to sleep, and once by Sibyl of Cumae with a honey cake. And you can add to the list Voldemort and Hermione Granger if you wish, as ones who tricked Kerberus. As a world builder, seeing how these 2 rivers are not described in great detail, you can take them and tweak them as you see fit. Charon is described either as an old man or as a hooded avatar of death. I personally would take him and go either the Terry Pratchett route and make him a very good professional, the perfect bureaucrat who does take pity on those who are scared and tries to encourage them, but who does his job quite proficiently with a cold patience. Or make him a jolly old individual who is very talkative, joking, reassuring the souls of the departed, comforting them, handing out candy and advice. Of course, this depends on the kind of world you are running, but what I'm trying to say is that you can take any of these information and run with it. Tweak it as you please. Okay, time to check out the miniature, then we'll continue. It is time to wrap up Balazar, Lord of Excess himself. I finished painting him in a sickly purple color, and yes, the silk and jewels covered thing at his feet, resting on the palanquin, is his schlong, in case you were wondering. I used a variety of colors and technical paints for the jewels and braces and all of his adornments, trying to give a sense of, well, access, not necessarily good taste. With Balazar done, it is time to paint his victims. I chose to paint them in a way as to highlight the fact that he enjoys variety, seeking out special individuals of different lineages and descendancies to taste them all. I went with out-of-the-tube colors, skin tones from both Vallejo and Citadel, and once they are done, a coat of Agrax Earthshade wash will add shadows and tie the painting together. Once that is dry, I will come back to the original colors and re-add the midtones. I didn't go for highlights, I wanted the ostentatiousness to shine through the most, and I think I got the effect I was looking for. Alrighty then. Once the Styx was crossed, the souls of the departed would reach the third river, Cocytus, the river of lamentation and wailing. According to the ancient author Virgil or Virgil, the river winds through a deep dark forest and was used by the infernal judges to send down to Tartarus the souls of murderers. The river is also connected to the Erinyes or the Furies, with them living on the banks of the river. In the forest that borders the river, black oozes slither their way beneath the black leaves, and vultures and screech owls nest in between the black branches of the trees. The Roman author Statius describes the waters of the river as being sulphurous, and Seneca writes that the leaves are gloomy and heavy with the influence of Sopor, an aspect of Hypnos, the god of sleep. Once the souls managed to traverse this region of Hades, they would reach Phlegethon, the river of fire. The river is described as coiling around the world and flowing down to the depths of Tartarus. In this river, the souls of the sinful are roasting, burning away their sins. Not much else has survived about this river, at least from what I could find, but I'm sure you can see that this river is the inspiration for the Abrahamic hell, with the river of fire slowly roasting the sinners. And then the soul would reach the last river, Lethe. This is perhaps one of the most famous rivers in mythology, the river of oblivion and forgetfulness. Every soul that reached Hades had to drink out of the river so that the memories of their lives would be washed away, and perhaps a new life could then start. By the way, there are some scarce ancient Greek sources that mention reincarnation, such as Plato, the myth of Er, and earlier in the doctrine of Orphism in Pythagoras' works. The river bordered Elysium, the Greek paradise, and the sound of its waters rushing by would induce a sense of calm and peace to those found worthy enough to spend their eternity in paradise. The river would flow from the cave where Hypnos, the god of sleep, dwelled, lulling him to sleep. Hypnos' cave was soundproof, with only the murmuring of the river reaching the god's ears, while at the entrance of the cave, poppies and other sleep-inducing flowers and plants would grow. In his cave, night and day would meet, and the soft light would be perfect for naps. No bright light nor loud sound would enter the cave and disturb the god of sleep. Hypnos was always portrayed as a benevolent god who would help mortals, be it through a good night's rest or a healing sleep. And because mortals would spend almost half of their lives asleep, he would be responsible for them half the time. The god was said to have been the son of Nyx, night, and Erebus, darkness, and his twin sibling was Thanatos, the personification of death. Thanatos was tightly linked with the Moirai, the Fates, especially Atropos, the one who cuts the thread of life, and was almost always described as being the god or goddess, depending on the era and source, of peaceful deaths. Hypnos' wife was Pasithea, the youngest Charites or Graces. According to Virgil in the Aeneid, only the shades of those who drank from the Lethe would be allowed to reincarnate, having forgotten their previous lives. At the same time, the myth evolved and eventually all souls had to drink from Lethe. For this, the shades or souls would be directed to drink from the water pooling at the roots of a cypress tree. On the other hand, Orpheus, the mythical bard, upon descending to Hades to retrieve the shade of his wife Eurydice, gave several shades instructions on how to preserve or retrieve their memories. The story goes that on the day of their wedding, Eurydice was attacked by a satyr, and while running away from the creature she fell in a viper's nest where she was bitten and she died. Orpheus found her, and with a broken heart he played the most sorrowful song that made the gods themselves weep. They instructed him to travel to the Underworld and retrieve her soul, as not even the fates would stand in his way. He traveled the Underworld and found the shade of his beloved wife. He gave her and other shades a password that allowed them access to a pool of water called Mnemosyne, the pool of memory, at the roots of a poplar tree. Hades's servants would not allow anyone drink from that pool without the password. Eurydice drank from it and remembered who she and Orpheus were. Hades and Persephone agreed to allow them passage to the realm of the living, and the Moirai, the Fates, decreed that he travel before her and not look back at her until they both reached the surface, the land of the living. They traveled through the Underworld with Orpheus hearing only whispers from his wife, and once he stepped onto the realm of the living, in his eagerness he turned around to gaze upon his wife. But she had not yet stepped over the threshold, and in the span of a heartbeat, she vanished into the shadows once more, to Orpheus's despair. But there was nothing he could do. He broke the fate's instructions. Now, the Lethe flowed next to Hades' palace in the Underworld, and in some myths, the Mnemosyne was another river entirely that flowed next to the Lethe instead of a pool of water at the roots of the poplar tree. At the foot of the palace, the cypress and the poplar would be found, while the opposite bank of the Lethe was a great wasteland. Lethe was the personification of oblivion and forgetfulness, and was the daughter of Eris, the goddess of strife and discord. Again, as a world builder, you can take these myths and run with them, tweak them and dress them up as you see fit. The Underworld is your oyster. And with that, we've covered and crossed the 5 rivers of the Greek Underworld, and I also threw in some details I left out in my previous video about the Underworld in general, but we're not done. Let's see how the miniature is coming along, and we will start wrapping things up with Dante's Inferno. I had to take a few moments to decide. I asked my wife for advice. What would Balazar enjoy more as platters for his exotic fruits? I was thinking of perhaps silver or platinum, or go with something like rubies to add a different sparkle to the miniature, but nope. He would most definitely go with gold again. How else would he enjoy his pineapple and other fruit? A couple of touch-ups here and there, areas that I missed or didn't come out the way I wanted them. And now, with Balazar done, the palanquin done, the platters done, his victims done, it is time to paint the exotic fruits he so much enjoys, paired well with his victims. This is going to take a while. The fruits are very detailed and very small, and I'm trying to make sure I don't touch the already painted areas and mess them up. In the end, this will all be worth it. Alright, let's continue. When we think of the Inferno, or Hell, at least in Abrahamic religions, we have a vivid image of souls being spit roasted or barbecued for eternity. And these images mostly stem from Dante Alighieri's Divina Commedia. The narrative poem was written between 1308 and 1321 and is considered one of the greatest works of literature across the world. The poem is divided in 3 parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And as the names suggest, each tackles one of the final destinations of a soul. Dante is the protagonist of the story and the direct witness of all 3 afterlives. But I won't go into details about the poem itself, instead I will tell you of the 9 layers of hell as Dante presents them. If you are in any way, shape or form familiar with Dungeons and Dragons or most fantasy worlds set in an ancient or medieval setting, you will recognize most of the layers. According to Dante, once a soul crossed Acheron with the help of Charon, they would arrive at the first layer, or circle of the Inferno, in Limbo. This is the circle on which those unbaptized and the virtuous pagans would reside. Limbo was awfully similar to the Asphodel Meadows, the bland and boring layer of the Greek underworld where souls would continue with the boring routines they enjoyed while alive. My previous video covers the Asphodel Meadows if you want to find out more. Some of the most notable residents of Limbo include ancient Roman and Greek poets and authors such as Homer, Horace or Horace, Ovid, Lucan, and many others. In the middle of Limbo, a great castle stands tall, guarded by 7 gates. Beyond the 7 gates, Romans and Trojans would be encountered, with the most prominent inhabitants of the castle being Electra, Hector, Aeneas, Caesar, Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons, by the way I have a video on them as well, Latinus and Lavinia, Junius Brutus, Lucretia, and even Saladin, the famous Muslim general and his closest advisors. By the way, I have videos that mention most of the characters listed here if you want to check them out. Another group of people encountered here were Aristotle, Socrates and Plato, Zeno, Diogenes, Euclid, Ptolemy, Hippocrates and Galen, Seneca, Cicero, and even Orpheus and Linus, and many others. The second layer of hell was lust, and this is where the fun begins. The layer is guarded by the serpentine creature Minos. Before Minos, the souls will have to confess their sins, and depending on said sins, Minos would coil itself around the soul a number of times equal to the number of the layer they will spend eternity on. The circle itself is characterized by howling winds that sweep up souls and whirl them around without pause, signifying the drift of the sinners between lovers and how they allow themselves to be swept up by passion. Among the carnal malefactors, as Dante calls them, he encounters Cleopatra of Egypt, Helen of Troy, Achilles, Paris, Dido, and many more. The third circle is gluttony. On this layer, a constant foul, putrid, icy rain creates a repugnant slush in which those condemned by their voracious appetite wallow. They are guarded by Cerberus, who is described by Dante as a great multi-headed worm who tortures the souls it is guarding. The ice-cold putrid mud and the wallowing symbolizes the cold attitude of those who overindulge not only in drinks and food but other addictions too, and their general attitude towards those less fortunate. They stuffed their bodies with more than they ever needed while others went without. The fourth circle is greed. The layer is lorded over by Plutus, the ancient Greek personification of wealth and prosperity, son of goddess Demeter and brother to Persephone. Here, those who love their wealth more than anything else, or those who squandered vast fortunes, are forever tormented. Among the souls here can be found many clergymen, popes, and cardinals. The fifth circle, according to Dante, is wrath. Through this circle the river Styx flows, and in the swamps created by the Styx, the wrathful fight each other forever on. Under the surface of the Styx, the sullen, those who are passively wrathful, withdraw from the active conflict and spend eternity. Beyond the fifth circle, or layer, the city of Dis stands terrifyingly. According to Dante, the walls are guarded by fallen angels and furies, while the walls of the Dis separate the lower hells from the previous circles, those of incontinence, as Dante calls them. Beyond the gates of Dis, the sixth circle stretches onward. This is the circle of heresy. The souls sent here for eternity are enclosed in fiery tombs to suffer for their sins. Among the most notable residents are Epicure and his followers, as well as Anastasius I, the Byzantine emperor, or Pope Anastasius. Scholars can't really agree on this. The seventh circle is of violence and is guarded by the Minotaur. The circle is divided into several concentric circles depending on the type of violence. The river Phlegethon flows through the circle and is used to punish the inhabitants of the circle. The first ring is reserved for those who use violence against neighbors, murderers, war makers, plunderers, and tyrants. They are submerged in the fiery river. The ring is patrolled by Chiron and his centaurs, who release arrows against those who stand up in the river more than they are allowed. Among those who are punished here we have Alexander the Great, Attila the Hun, Pyrrhus of Epirus, and many others. The second ring is that of violence against self, and here those who unalive themselves are turned into gnarled and thorny trees on which harpies feast. They are not allowed a human form any longer, as they destroyed it themselves and don't deserve it anymore in the eyes of the Abrahamic religions. The third ring is that of violence against God, arts, and nature. The ring is a great plain of burning sand with flakes of flame raining down. Here, the souls of the blasphemers, those who unleash violence against God, sodomites, those who unleash violence against nature, and usherers, loan sharks, those who are violent against the arts, are punished forever. Hang on. I caught her again. She's mine. The eighth circle is a fraud, and this circle too is divided into several areas. First is reserved for penderers. I didn't really know this word, but apparently it means pimps, basically. And seducers. Among them, Jason is forever whipped by horned demons as a seducer. Another area is reserved for flatterers, those who exploit others' fears and desires, and in this circle they are apparently wallowing in feces. Other areas are reserved for simoniacs, those who sell church offices, sorcerers, such as fortune tellers, diviners, astrologers, and false prophets. Other areas were reserved for berators, corrupt politicians who enrich themselves, hypocrites, thieves, counselors of fraud, sowers of discord, and falsifiers. The ninth and last circle of hell is reserved for those guilty of treachery, and this circle too is divided in multiple rings. The first ring is reserved for those guilty of treachery against kindred, with Cain being the most notable inhabitant. Then we have a ring for traitors of country, among which we can find Ganelon, the Oathbreaker paladin, member of Charlemagne's rear guard who betrayed his paladin brothers. By the way, I have an awesome video on the first real paladins of history if you wanna check it out. The third ring is that of traitors against guests. Then we have one reserved for those who commit treachery against their lords, and in the very center of the ninth circle, the arch-traitor in the Abrahamic religions, Lucifer himself, or Dis, as chief traitor. All traitors are encased in blocks of ice contorted in unnatural positions, while Lucifer himself is waist deep in ice. He has 3 faces, each with a different color, one red, one yellow, and one black. By the way, Dante's work is based on Aristotle's writings on the Underworld and Cicero's additions to those writings. And with that, my funky travel companions, my cups are almost empty, my throat is parched, and I believe we reached the end of our story for today. I believe that you have more than enough information to easily include the Inferno in your homebrewed world, if you are into world building of any kind. The story I shared with you is only a frame on which you can construct whatever you want. Describe the Underworld how you see fit, inhabit it with whomever you want. The only limit is your imagination. And if you're not into world building, I'm sure that at least you learned something new today, something you perhaps didn't know before. Now, don't forget to check out my previous videos on the many things I mentioned today, such as the Furies, the Fates, Iris, Paladins, the Amazon, etc, etc, etc. Oh, and Potato's 14th name is Horsey. Oh, and if you want to see more of my lovely assistants, well, oh, there she is. Make sure you check out TW Creative minus Cats, a channel with shows that have nothing to do with history and everything to do with cat adventures. Thank you so much for the privilege of your time. I truly hope you found some inspiration and learned something new today, and I can't wait to see you all funky people here next time on Funky Monkey MP, the place where you get your dose of miniature painting, history, world building and trivia. Remember, be curious, take inspiration from the past, and never stop learning, world building and creating amazing things, whatever those are. Your mind and imagination are awesome, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful, funky day. Cheers.